Ignition systems. I'm a pretty big fan of Petronics myself. Chad's had some in his cars for years, and they've given really good service. They're not very expensive. What I like about the system is it's sound engineering, and it does away with points, and you really, unless you look at the colors of the wires coming out, you can't tell it's there. So we're big on historical accuracy in making the cars. I don't like bolting on, some weird looking thing on there. To answer your question, I'm a pretty big fan of Petronics. We've had real good luck with them. And now they've got a Petronics 2 that Sam's familiar with that's even more durable about leaving your key on. That's the one thing, points do the same thing. If you leave your key on and those points are closed, you burn those points up. And the early Petronics are not real tolerant of leaving the key on for hours on end. The Petronics 2 that Sam's been talking about is more durable in that situation. But either way, you should never leave that key on all the time. It's not designed for that.
I still carry, though, a mechanical fuel distributor with me.
Just in
as
case.
a backup.
Yeah. The thing about points, when they're set up, they are points, and you can fix them in the field. The problem with an electronic ignition, when it goes bad, the best you can do is stare at it and wonder what's going on inside,
That's the reason why I recommend, if you do go to that, to just carry a spare one of those, because even the local, you're lucky to find one at the local parts place.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, if you're, it's just like carrying a set of points and condenser or whatever. If you got an electronic ignition, you should probably buy 2 of them and put one of them over in the door pocket someplace.
Yeah. Wouldn't be a bad idea.
Well, I mean, that way you have spare parts.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of electronic ignition overall, though, because points have their limits, and I don't like adjusting points. And I personally have witnessed in both my racing and here at the shop that we've had cars come in and the points are fine, they're adjusted properly. We'll put a Petronics in it, and it just runs smoother.
And fires off. It's a much hotter spark, so when the gasoline hits the sparks, boom, it pops off.
We had a Jag in here, a Mark II, real nice car, and it was a hard starter. And we converted it to Petronics, and it's so nice. It's like it barely hits on 1.5 cylinders and it fires off. If you think about it, your cold start is your worst time for your electric system. Things are cold, you need an extra rich mixture to fire, you're cranking off the battery, and your oil's cold and thick, so it's hard to turn. You got everything working against you. You got a slobbery rich mixture, and you got to try to light that mixture off. So anything you can do to have a good hot spark at that point will help. So now, having said that, I'm going to go back to that whole resistance thing and talk about this, because this is the one thing we see a lot too. And with you guys that are doing stuff on your cars and changing things, you need to be aware of this. The original Lucas wiring, or most of them, you'll have a circuit, something like, you got battery over here, and you got, let's make it positive ground. You got plus and minus over here, and you got wires going. You got your ignition switch here, and you got wires coming off that, and it goes down here to your starter, and you got your distributor over here. You got wire coming over to that, to your coil, 2 terminals on the coil and whatnot. And let's say this is a little more modern, it's got a solenoid in here. On that solenoid there was usually an extra terminal, and that terminal went from that solenoid over to the coil. And what that was about was when you're cranking this and your battery is connected here to here, it also connected to that terminal, and it gave you a solid 12 volts to your coil. What we see a lot when people want to add accessories to their car, they generally want it something that's only on when the ignition's on. So they go to the back of the ignition switch up here with the key in it. That's my key. Pretty good drawn, huh?
Yeah.
And they tie into this terminal. Or they go under the dash and they find a white wire that's hot when the ignition's on. And they use one of those 3-cent plastic crimp-on splicey things. Oh, yeah. Or they cut the wire and they twist it all together with their new wire and they put tape on it. All right? I'm not picking up people. This is just what we see, okay? Here's the problem with that. Now, when your ignition's on and you're cranking, we just had this, and it was in a, I won't say what car the other day.
I'm not going to name names, yes.
Hard start when it's cold. very, very difficult to start when it's cold. We measured battery voltage when you're cranking, right? When you really got a low, when you're spinning that cold, stiff motor over with the starter motor, battery voltage had dropped to 9.5 volts. Cranking hard. Well, guess what? We measure battery voltage at the coil, 5.5 volts is all we had at the coil. There's no way that thing's going to start. No way. So what did we do? We went back to the factory style wiring. We ran a jumper from that solenoid over to the coil. Now we got another source of 12 volts that's not in series. I didn't talk about parallel and series circuits, but it's basically in parallel now. So it's not being resisted by anything else. We get a full 12 volts at the coil, and that car starts what, Sam? That thing, you said, now it starts before you even turn the key.
Well, that's scary. We fixed it too nice.
Yeah. But yeah, that thing,
yes, we're not naming names. There's a gentleman here with a certain car.
no. But I mean, the difference, Sam could testify to, the difference was pretty appalling, wasn't it? Yeah. And here's where that'll show up the most. Okay, and here's where I'm probably gonna offend some people, but when you ask me about the Petronics and ignition systems, okay, you see all these ads, you know, you get the I don't want to say, okay, the Crane, you know, XR 700 thrust 7, you know, million volt Sparkomatic coil, right? Oh, more volts, more volts. Well, again, there's nothing free in electricity. So guess what? That system draws a lot more watts, a lot more amps. And if you don't have the voltage to supply it, you're not getting any of the benefit you just paid for. So it's important to have a full 12 volts at that stuff. And any way you can do that. And it's a pretty simple test to do. Like I say, you can put your voltmeter right on it while somebody's cranking the car and see how much voltage is actually reaching it. And you want a good solid 12 volts.
Normal system, what you've drawn right here, actually those coils actually run on about 10 volts or 9 volts. And when you're cranking, basically, you'll find out that your car goes down to about 9 volts, which means then if you bypass it that way, that's a bypass to the coil, will give it a full 9 volts while you're cranking on it, so you get that instant fire.
Well,
but the other side of the coil usually is running on a resistor that makes the coil run on 9 volts all the time.
If it has a ballast resistor.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have very few ballasted.
That's pretty much the system you drew there, though. So
yeah, and in that
I just don't see the resistor in the power supply.
Well, like I say, the cars we deal with here, we don't have ballast resistors. Very, very few. Modern cars
Well,
do.
there was a few of those BMC cars right around 68, 69. They used a ballast resistor in them and stuff like that too. So.
Yeah. And in Randy's unnamed owner Mini that we worked on has that unmentioned Crane system as well. And so the notifier that I usually find when there's a problem with that is when you are cranking and it's not firing and you let go when it fires.
Yeah.
That's when it finally gets that full voltage at that last second.
I use a Crane system all the time and have been for years.
Yeah, I'm not bad-mouthing that.
No, the only real reason why I like it better than the Petronics, although I like electronic ignitions a hell of a lot better than a set of points, is that basically the like you, I've done years and years of racing with my Mini or whatever, and what we find out is that the Petronics don't fire at a 90-degree interval, where very easily that happens with a Crane system because it's operated on a LED system.
Yeah, the opto sensor. Yeah.
But other than that, basically you're forming the same thing, just differently.
Two different
instead
systems.
of magnetically, you're using a light.
Yeah.
But
the optical can go wonky as well. So
well,
I mean,
yeah, of course.
So everything has its weaknesses. So I mean,
there's plus and minuses to all systems.
Yeah.
What he's talking about there, for you guys, if you don't understand, the Petronic system, it uses on a 4-cylinder system. There are 4 magnets embedded in a piece that slips over to the distributor, and then it's basically a Hall effect sensor that goes on the outside. When that magnet comes by, it triggers and fires the system like a set of points would. The XR 700 and some of those other ones, they use what they call an opto sensor. It's got a little LED in there, and there's instead of a ring with magnets, you set this ring that's got slots cut in it, and so the light shines through the slot and hits the receptor and triggers it. So it's just a different way of triggering it. They
Just
both.
in our racing, basically, we found out running them on the dyno injector that they don't fire at a 90-degree interval. So
Yeah.
basically, your timing's not the same. So
That'd be weird. Yeah, I haven't experienced that. But
Any experience with the old Delta Mark 10 electronic ignitions?
No. I can tell you, back in the day, and this is on a 65 MGB that I had, I put one on it back when they were coming out, and it transformed the performance of that car.
yeah.
I never had to change points until the rubbing block that worked off of the distributor cam finally wore down. And it would, last time I replaced them, I can recall, I couldn't detect that there was any gap left. But the thing was still running. It started missing a little bit. It still was running good, didn't drop and leave me someplace.
That's incredible.
And also the other thing you did with that thing is you opened the gaps on your plugs to 40,000, so you threw a hell of a gap.
hell of a
in this
spark.
with a stock coil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great
It was
spot.
a great system.
Yeah, the
I ran it
transit.
for about 10, 12 years.
I think those were the early transistorized ones, and they were.
the only trouble with raising your gap is basically you're using, just like you say, plugging more things in. That system, inside that distributor, your rotor, your cap, all that whole system is dependent upon running a 25 thousandths gap on your spark plug. And as soon as you open that gap, basically, all you're doing is you're lowering the reserve in your tune-up to the point where you'll start firing too high and your coil will start misfiring on you, basically. So it doesn't advantage you at all to actually raise the thing to a wider gap, basically, because all you're doing is requiring it to fire more voltage, which makes a shorter tune-up when you get through with it all.
It
Because you
worked
don't
for me
have
for
the reserve.
100,000 miles, so I don't know how.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you have to pair the whole system with a different coil too to give you more, and then you get into the whole
You get
thing of
more
dwelling.
spark- You get more spark by adding amperage, not voltage, basically. So if you got a higher amperage coil, you can get a hotter spark.
Yeah, that's, you can go 1.5 ohm, 3 ohm, whatever, but you want that whole system to be matched because it does have to all work together.
There's only so much that I find out that you be driving along and all of a sudden the car stops running. And you go out there and change the rotor and off it goes again, and there's a nice little streak going down the side. And that's your limitation. That's as much as you can go as far as spark is concerned. So you're going to blow the damn rotor off and have some troubles with it if you try and get too much spark going in that system.
Yeah.
It just can't
So
handle it.
that's why the really high end one, the Mark III Pertronics igniter, I think it's overkill. You're cooking other things, So like there's just that fine variance, like you don't want to go too hog wild, and points are just dinosaurs. So it's finding the sweet spot, So there's always shades of gray.
The electronics handles the spark so well, basically, that if you set it at 25, your whole system would be a hell of a lot better off. It'll actually fire it at a higher amperage most of the time,
Right.
which gives you a hotter spark even at 25,000 volts.
Right.
I don't run a Mark 10 anymore. I use them.
I told you that's come and gone. Those
Yeah.
plate type came and gone.
But at that time, it was a hell of a deal.
Yeah.
The best you had.
That was the trouble with the point system in the first place, is the rubbing block always wears. And you have to stop every 6 months to adjust your points so you can get your timing back where it belongs.
Yeah.
And back onto the difference of the draw on the newer electronic ignition systems and whatnot, they have fail-safes in them, so that way if there's not enough voltage in the system, they're just not going to work. They're not going to operate, not going to do anything. So that's where we run into a lot more of those issues with the newer systems. They're not going to even try. They're saying, hey, there's not enough there, I'm not doing anything.
What he's talking about is the whole system. Like I said before, there's no free ride in electrics. You can't cheat the math, you change something on one end, it's going to affect something on the other end.